My name is Khaled Hassan. I'm 42 years old. And my life story begins among the centuries-old alleys of Aleppo, one of the oldest and most culturally vibrant cities in Syria. I vividly remember the golden mornings when the sun rose through the stone rooftops, illuminating the alleys where children played and vendors set up their stalls full of fruits, spices, and fresh bread. The old city of Aleppo was not just where I lived. It was the setting where my identity was shaped. It was there, amidst ancient mosques and the comforting sound of the adhan, the call to prayer that resounded from the minarets 5 times a day, that my soul learned to find its way. I was born into a deeply devout Muslim family. My father, a respected Quran scholar, dedicated his life to teaching the teachings of Islam to the community. He was a man of quiet wisdom, with a steady gaze and calm words. From a very young age, I was guided by him in the ways of faith. There was something magical about the way he recited the sacred verses. Every word seemed charged with light. Under his guidance, I began to memorize the Quran as a child. I remember spending hours sitting next to him on the living room carpet, repeating verses with devotion, seeking not only to memorize, but to deeply understand the messages contained in each line. This routine accompanied me throughout my childhood and youth, and little by little my heart also fell in love with the study of hadiths, the records of the words and actions of the Prophet Muhammad, which completed my spiritual understanding. At the age of 20, I reached a milestone that made my family proud. I was invited to lead prayers at our neighborhood mosque. It was a modest mosque, but full of familiar faces. Seeing my parents among the worshippers, with tears of emotion and pride in their eyes, was one of the most defining moments of my life. I felt like my mission was being fulfilled. I was a spiritual guide for my community, a reflection of what my father had taught me to be, but the tranquility we had known began to slowly slip away, like sand slipping through our fingers. As the years passed, Syria became engulfed in political tensions, sectarian conflicts, and eventually a devastating war. My beloved city of Aleppo became the scene of battles, bombings, and pain. The sound that once filled the skies, the call to prayer, was replaced by the roar of explosions and cries of despair. I lost friends, neighbors, and tragically, close family members. Each day I felt as if a part of me was being ripped away. My heart was weighed down by each loss, and my faith, though still alive, began to be challenged by a brutal reality. In 2016, after a particularly violent night when our home was partially destroyed, I made the most painful and necessary decision of my life: to leave, not just to flee the war, but to seek a place where my children could grow up in safety, where my wife could sleep without fear, and where, hopefully, I could rebuild some sense of purpose. With just 2 suitcases and our documents wrapped in plastic, we left Syria. My wife, our 2 young children, and I embarked on an uncertain journey to the UK. Arriving in Birmingham was like landing on another planet. The sky was gray, the air damp and chilly. The streets were wide, silent, and impersonal. So different from the hot, noisy back streets of Aleppo. I understood almost no English and felt invisible in the hustle and bustle of the crowds. The sense of being a stranger was not just geographical, it was emotional, spiritual. But even here, lost in a new land, I held on to what had always been my foundation, my faith. Over time, and with the help of other Muslim brothers who had gone through similar experiences, I found a small Islamic center on the outskirts of the city. I started out as a quiet visitor, but soon they recognized my experience and invited me to lead prayers. And so, little by little, I became the Imam of that community, a simple but vibrant mosque made up of immigrants and refugees from all over the Islamic world. That mosque became more than a place of prayer. It became a spiritual home for all of us who had been uprooted. Today, my days are filled with more than prayer. I meet young people facing discrimination in schools, parents struggling to feed their children, women missing the family they left behind. I listen to stories that echo my own, and I offer advice, comfort, and, when possible, hope. To many, I am seen as a beacon of stability, an anchor amid the storms of migrant life. But in truth, each person who enters that mosque also strengthens me. They remind me that even when everything around us seems to be falling apart, faith and humanity can be rebuilt, one act of compassion at a time. This is my story, not of heroism, but of resistance, not of conquest, but of continuity. I am Khaled Hassan, a man who lost almost everything, but who found in faith and community a reason to carry on. And no matter how far I am from Aleppo, it still lives on in me. In the verses I recite, in the prayers I lead, and in the love I carry for my family, my culture, and my people. For many years, I had been taught that Islam was the true path to salvation. And this belief was not something I had just learned or repeated through tradition. It was something that burned within me with a deep conviction, rooted in my soul. I passed on this faith with love and dedication, believing fully in every word I said about mercy, justice, and total surrender to the will of Allah. But what I did not know, what no book, sermon, or theology class could have predicted, was that this faith would be put to the test in ways I could never have imagined. It was a typical winter evening in Birmingham, damp, cold, and with the kind of biting wind that makes your bones ache. We had just finished the Isha prayer, the last of the day, and as usual, I exchanged a few words with the brothers at the mosque before saying goodbye. I was deep in thought as I drove through the wet streets. In my mind, I reviewed the points of the Friday sermon. I wanted to talk about perseverance and faith, about how we should not lose trust in Allah, even in the face of life's trials. Little did I know that very night, this lesson would go from being just a speech to becoming a living part of my own story. The sky was gray, and the rain created a shimmering veil in the car headlights. I entered a busy avenue close to home when everything happened in the blink of an eye. A car coming in the opposite direction suddenly appeared, sliding out of control on the wet road. There was no time to think, to brake, to do anything. The impact was brutal. The metallic sound of the collision echoed like thunder, followed by a suffocating and dense silence. I felt my body being thrown forward with violent force, my chest pressed against the seatbelt, my head spinning, my vision going black. And then, nothing. A void without time or sound. When a thread of consciousness returned, the first thing I noticed was the pain, intense, searing as if my body were on fire from within. I heard voices in the distance as if coming from underwater. Lights flickered and blurry faces passed before my eyes. "He's in critical condition," someone whispered urgently. "We need to get him now." I was loaded into an ambulance, my consciousness flickering like a candle about to go out. At that moment, even between life and death, something inside me clung to what was most essential. I began to repeat, not with my mouth, but in my heart, the Shahada. There is no God but Allah, Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. It was these words, the same ones I taught to so many, that became my last thread of connection with this world. I was rushed to the hospital. The doctors acted quickly, but the prognosis was grim. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, severe head trauma. Intubated, surrounded by machines and tubes, my life hung by a thread. The doctors told my wife that medicine had done all it could. Now all that was left was to wait and pray. For days, my body remained immobile, confined to an ICU bed. And yet, while everything seemed stagnant from the outside, something extraordinary began to happen inside me, something that cannot be explained by medical logic. It was during one of those silent early mornings when hope was almost extinguished that I experienced something that would profoundly alter my understanding of existence. I felt a strange lightness, as if the weight of pain and flesh had disappeared. When I opened my eyes, if you can call them that, I realized I was no longer inside my body. I was floating above the bed, observing the scene below with impossible clarity. I saw myself, frail, pale, with tubes attached to my nose and mouth, machines blinking and beeping around me like silent guardians of life. Beside the bed, I saw my wife. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hands clasped in supplication, whispering prayers in Arabic, as if to awaken my spirit with her words. My children, young, held her veil and cried softly. The scene was heartbreaking. The most surprising thing was not just seeing, but feeling it with indescribable intensity of the love, the desperation, the faith that filled that room. I found myself facing everything that truly mattered, my family, my faith, my fragility before the Creator. I, the man who for years had guided so many others with safety and wisdom, was now in the hands of Allah, completely vulnerable. That out-of-body experience was not a dream, nor a hallucination. It was a profound call, a silent reminder that nothing belongs to us, not even the body we inhabit. And there, suspended between two worlds, I understood for the first time the extent of true surrender, of tawakkul, complete trust in Allah. That moment marked the beginning of an inner transformation that was yet to come. Tears streamed down my children's cheeks, and I desperately wanted to touch them, to hold them, to tell them that I was still there, that I hadn't left them. But no matter how hard I struggled to move, to speak, or even to blink, nothing happened. It was as if my soul was trapped in a limbo between life and death, just watching. And then I slowly felt an invisible force begin to pull me. It wasn't physical. It was something spiritual, uncontrollable, like a magnetic, inescapable current that was pulling me from the hospital room. The environment around me began to dissolve, as if it were dissolving into smoke. My heart, even outside my body, filled with fear. I knew I was going somewhere, but I didn't know where. As I was pulled in, everything went dark. Not the darkness of a lightless room, but a total absence of color, time, sound, and form. An overwhelming nothingness. I was being sucked into a deep tunnel of living, almost conscious darkness. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if it were breathing in sadness. And then the whispers began. Faint at first, barely audible, but soon they grew louder, like a chorus of wailing coming from every direction. These were not voices that brought comfort or peace. They were filled with suffering, pain, guilt, and despair. They were the cries of souls that seemed to have been lost, and each sound pierced my spirit like a cold blade. My heart was beating like a panicked drum. I tried to scream, to cry out for mercy, for help, but there was no sound. No words left my lips. I was alone with my fear, being driven through this living darkness until suddenly the tunnel ended. Before me opened a landscape that would chill even the strongest of hearts. A vast, parched wasteland blackened like burning coal. The air was thick, toxic, filled with a suffocating smell of sulfur and smoke. A reddish hue covered everything, as if the sky were on fire. On the horizon, shadows moved, They were not ordinary shadows, but distorted, human-like shapes, writhing as if in eternal agony. And then came the screams, screams that chilled the soul. They were not just sounds of physical pain, but of existential pain, the kind that comes from guilt, loss, and belated regret. It was at that moment that I understood I was no longer in the physical world. This was another reality, a plane of existence where everything I had learned in life took shape before me. I clearly remembered the teachings about the afterlife. Jannah, paradise for the righteous, and Jahannam, hell, for those who had gone astray. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared me for witnessing this with my own soul's eyes. I stood there, trembling, when I noticed something approaching. Figures began to take shape in the distance. As they came closer, my spiritual body shivered. They were human figures, cloaked in shadow. There was something familiar about them, though I couldn't place it at first. But then the darkness lifted a little from their faces, and I saw them. My heart almost stopped. These were men I deeply revered. They were renowned scholars, religious leaders whose words had shaped my faith since I was young. I knew them from books, from videos, from sermons. Wise men who, to me, represented truth and light. But here, in this place, they were not at peace. Their faces were drawn with pain. Their eyes, once filled with wisdom, were now clouded with regret. What I saw in them was not greatness. It was torment. One of them stepped forward. His voice, though weak, carried the weight of an ancient warning. He spoke my name with reverence and sadness. Khalid. Listen carefully. I was stunned. I wanted to ask so many things, wanted to understand what this meant, why such respected men would be in this dark place. Warn me? About what? I asked, with what little courage I had left. Why are you here? He didn't answer right away. He looked around as if his surroundings were causing him an indescribable pain. When he finally spoke again, his tone was urgent and regretful, because not everything we taught was true, and not everything we lived reflected what we preached. We came to warn you so that you don't follow the same path. At that moment, I felt a shock inside me. A crack in the certainties I had carried. It was as if a deeper truth was about to emerge, a revelation that would forever change the course of my soul. And then, the place started to shake. But how? The words barely came out of my mouth, choked with astonishment. I saw them before me, men who had symbolized wisdom, faith, and religious authority throughout my life. Figures I had admired, whose words had shaped sermons I had repeated myself, and whose postures I had tried to mirror in my spiritual journey. But now, there they were. Not as lights guiding the way, but as broken souls, haunted by regrets beyond human comprehension. The first of them, the scholar who had come forward to speak to me, lowered his eyes. His shoulders, once erect with the assurance of one carrying divine knowledge, were now hunched under the weight of a crushing truth. His voice, once firm, now came out trembling, almost a lament. We were wrong, Khalid. Those words hit my chest like a hammer. We followed teachings that blinded us to the true essence of faith. We thought our prayers, fasts, rituals, and laws would guarantee us salvation. But all of that was just a shell, a surface, and we didn't see what was right in front of us. There's only one way, Khaled. One and only way. And it's not the one we preach. I stood paralyzed. I wanted to ask. I wanted to understand. I wanted to cry out for more explanations. But before my mind could form a single question, I felt a different presence approaching. Time seemed to stop. The air grew dense and reverent, as if all reality around me had gone silent. A new figure appeared, radiating a light that was not of this world. It was majesty, but also pain. It was glory wrapped in sadness. I had no doubts. It was him, Muhammad. Not as the man described in books, but as a spiritual figure whose presence transcended any earthly description. His eyes met mine, and in that gaze there was authority, but also tenderness. He knew me. He knew everything. He knew every prayer I had prayed, every verse I had recited with devotion, every time I had knelt down begging for guidance, and yet there he stood, with sadness in his eyes. His voice echoed like holy thunder and whisper of mercy at the same time. Khaled, you have been chosen. My spiritual body weakened. I fell to my knees, feeling small in the face of the magnitude of that moment. His every word carried the weight of centuries. What you are seeing, he continued, is the fate of those who, even with religious zeal, rejected the truth. It was not gross sins, Khaled. It was the refusal to see, to hear, to accept that which was above tradition. My hands were shaking. But what truth? I asked, my voice breaking. I have always followed your teachings. I have loved Islam with all my soul. I have defended it. I have taught it. I have dedicated my life to it. Muhammad's face softened. He took a step toward me and, in a firm but pained voice, spoke the words that would shatter every structure I had built within myself. The truth, Khaled, is not in the rituals, nor in the laws that harden the heart. The truth is in Jesus. He is the way. The truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. At that moment I felt like my world had shattered. Jesus. I knew Isa, as we called him in Arabic, as an important prophet, yes, a servant of Allah, but just a man, one among many. How then could Muhammad, to whom I had dedicated my life, now say that Jesus was the way. My mind was spinning in confusion and awe. I wanted to resist. I wanted to scream that this didn't make sense, but at the same time, deep down inside me, there was a strange peace, as if something inside me had always known, but never dared to listen. Muhammad continued, "You must return, Khaled. Return to the world of the living. Tell those who still have time to seek Jesus, to know him, to surrender to him, for he is the bridge to the Father. He is salvation. And time, Khaled, time is running out." As he spoke, the ground beneath my feet began to shake. A deep, low sound echoed in the distance, as if time itself were being torn apart. The darkness around me condensed, and at the same time seemed to open up like a vortex. I felt that force again, the one that had pulled me away from the hospital, pulling me back. But this time I didn't fight it. I knew that a mission had been placed in my hands. And it wasn't just any mission. It was the truth I had sought all my life, and that now needed to be proclaimed. As I was drawn back into the tunnel, I heard the voices echo behind me. The voices of the repentant scholars and the voice of the prophet, each whispering into my soul, "Remember the message, share it with the world." And that's how my comeback began. Before I could even comprehend it, I was no longer in that dark tunnel. In an instant that seemed eternal, I was torn from that spiritual dimension and found myself back, hovering over my own body. The hospital room was plunged into tense silence, broken only by the monotonous and persistent sounds of the machines that monitored my vital signs. The white lights on the ceiling flickered slightly, as if reality itself was trying to adjust to my surroundings. And there, beside me, was my wife. Her eyes were swollen from crying so much, her hands clasped together in supplication as her lips murmured prayers without pause. She didn't know that I saw her, that I felt every word she whispered. An intense light began to envelop me. It was warm, alive, not like the harsh light of the room, but spiritual, welcoming, as if the sky itself were touching me. Then, as if a force were urgently pushing me, I was thrown back into my body. The impact was instantaneous. A sharp gasp escaped my mouth. My lungs expanded as if taking their first breath. My eyes opened, confused, weak, but alive. The first thing I heard were screams. First my wife's, then the medical teams rushing toward me. "He's back!" someone exclaimed. "He's breathing on his own." There was amazement and elation on the faces around me, but no one, absolutely no one, knew what had really happened. I hadn't just come back to life, I had come back with a mission. As I lay there, trying to grasp the reality of what had happened, my mind was elsewhere. My eyes stared up at the illuminated ceiling, but inside, I could still see the eyes of the damned, the faces of the scholars who had shaped me, distorted by eternal pain. I could still hear the screams, the warnings, and most of all, that voice, the voice of Muhammad. He had spoken to me clearly, not with hatred, but with sadness and love. The truth is in Jesus. Or it was as if my spirit had returned with two natures, one light, as if it had been purified by an illuminating truth, and the other heavy, crushing, by the burden of the message that now dwelt within me. How could I carry it alone? Over the next few days, time blended together. Sometimes I slept, sometimes I just closed my eyes, trying to escape the storm inside. The doctors came in, smiling, marveling at my recovery, telling me it was a miracle. And I knew it was, but not in the way they imagined. As my body healed, my soul struggled with a truth that seemed to clash with everything I had believed since I was a boy. All my life I had been a devoted servant of Islam. My world was built on pillars that I considered unshakable. Prayer 5 times a day, fasting during Ramadan, charity, pilgrimage, submission to the will of Allah. I had taught it, I had lived it, I had inspired others to follow the same path. And now, lying there in a hospital bed, I knew that all of that was but a shadow of the real light that had been revealed to me. The words echoed incessantly in my mind. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. But how could I accept this? How could I accept that the entire structure of my faith, my identity, my honor, my history, might not be the final destination, but just an incomplete beginning? And even more so, how could I tell my family about this, my wife, my children? They were raised just like me, with the same love for the Quran, with the same values, the same customs, the same reverence for Islam. How could I look them in the eye and tell them that everything we had been taught was incomplete? That I had found the truth in someone who, to us, had always been just another prophet among others? I feared for them. I feared for myself. I feared the shock it would bring. But at the same time, there was something burning in my heart. An urgency, as if the words that had been spoken to me were burned into my soul. You must return, share, do not delay. Time is short. I couldn't keep it to myself. Even though I was afraid, even though I felt the weight of possible rejection, I knew that the truth was bigger than my comfort, bigger than my reputation, bigger than my life. I had seen too much to keep quiet, and it was there, between the cold lights of the hospital and the burning heat of a calling that would not go away, that I made the decision. I didn't know how I would start, but one thing was certain. I needed to tell the world. The first few days back home were strangely quiet. There was an air of relief that I was alive, but inside, something inside me was erupting. The world around me seemed the same, but I was no longer the same person who had left for the mosque that rainy night. I carried a question inside me that kept me from breathing. What if everything I believed until now was only part of the truth? The answer wouldn't leave me alone. I tried to find refuge in what had always been familiar to me. I picked up my Quran, the same one I had read and taught for decades, and began to reread its verses with a different perspective. I searched each page, hungry for answers, trying to find some confirmation, some bridge between what had been revealed to me in that supernatural experience and what was written there. I reviewed the chapters that spoke about Isa, Jesus, and the contexts of the prophets. But the more I read, the more I realized that something didn't add up. Jesus was mentioned, yes, but in a limited way, as a prophet, as a messenger, as being born in a miraculous way, but never as the Son of God, never like the only way to salvation. The book I revered so zealously seemed to bypass, or even omit, what I had witnessed with my own spiritual eyes. The feeling was suffocating, as if I were looking at a painting with important parts covered by veils. There was beauty, there was truth there, but it was not complete. Something essential was missing, something I now knew was there, and that absence hurt like a deep cut. One night, after hours and hours of reading, inner debates and silent prayers, my heart could take no more. I placed the Quran on the table, fell to my knees on the floor of my dark room and cried. I cried like a lost child, like someone who had seen heaven and was now trapped between the walls of doubt. "Oh God, guide me," I pleaded. "If I was wrong, show me. If what I saw was true, confirm it for me. I don't want to follow lies. I don't want to live in illusion. But I also don't want to deny what I witnessed. It was real. It was true. I need to know. Please answer me." And it was in that moment of despair, with a bare and surrendered heart, that something happened that changed everything. I didn't hear a loud voice nor a thunder from the heavens, but within my spirit, something resonated. A presence, a softness that invaded the room without sound, without wind, but with a peace that I had never experienced before. And then, there, in the midst of the silence, a voice, not audible to the ears, but unmistakable to the soul. But Jesus, that was all it was. 3 words, but they carried an eternal weight. The voice was so full of love, so full of truth, that my heart seemed to melt. Tears streamed from my eyes uncontrollably. It was as if God were calling me personally, as if that whisper was clearer than any scream I had ever heard. But at the same time, there was a battle inside me. Am I being deceived? What if it's a test? What if I'm betraying my faith, my family, my history? The next few weeks were the most agonizing of my life. I slept little. I prayed constantly. I fasted for clarity. The questions never stopped. I pored over books, read testimonies of people who had been through similar experiences, dove into the Gospels for the first time with an open heart. I read the words of Jesus, and I couldn't ignore the power with which each of them spoke to me, as if they were written for me. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. He who has seen me has seen the Father. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." And then, slowly, like dawn breaking through the darkness of night, the truth began to emerge. Not like an avalanche, not like a sudden conversion, but like a light that grows in a dark room, pushing the shadows into the corners until you see what was always there and can no longer unsee it. Jesus, not just a prophet, not just a master, but the Savior, the Lamb, the Son of the living God. Everything inside me began to align with this. The peace I felt when I prayed in His name, the way my heart warmed as I read His words, the way everything that had previously seemed confusing now made sense. I was beginning to see. And that vision, that truth, was about to change everything, not just within me, but in my home, my community, my world. The more I read about Jesus, His life, His miracles, His heart-wrenching words, the more impossible it became for me to hold on to my old view of Him. Jesus was not just another prophet like so many others. He was different. He healed with His own authority. He forgave sins as only God could. He spoke to the Father as a son speaks to his beloved Father. There was something about His presence, even in print, that radiated divinity. Each page of the Bible seemed to draw me closer to Him. The parables touched me vividly. Words that I had previously listened to with detachment now set me on fire. And then, one quiet night, alone in my room with a Bible that a Christian nurse had left with me at the hospital, which I had not had the courage to open in depth until then, I came across a verse that seemed to leap off the page, John 14:6. Jesus answered, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." My eyes stopped there. My fingers froze on the paper. An electric current ran through my body. It was as if those words were written for me. As if He Himself was looking me in the eyes and saying, "Khaled, this is the answer you've been looking for." At that moment, everything made sense. This was it. This was the missing piece of the puzzle of my life. This was the truth I had touched on the other side of death. This was the presence I felt in the silence of my prayers. Jesus was the only way to God. No amount of ritualistic prayers, fasting, pilgrimages, or religious works could lead me to the Father. Only Him. Only Jesus. I felt a peace that I could not describe. A peace that did not come from logical reasoning, but from spiritual revelation. It was as if a new light had been lit within me. But along with this peace came something equally powerful. A responsibility. How could I keep this to myself? How could I remain silent knowing that millions of people, like I was for so many years, were trapped in a religious practice without the fullness of truth? How could I continue to live in silence knowing that my brothers and sisters were walking in darkness without knowing the one who was the light of the world? I needed to speak out. I needed to tell what I had experienced. I needed to show that Jesus was not just the prophet of the Christians. He was the savior of all humanity. And the first step, I knew, had to be within my own home. My body was still weak, but my spirit was more alive than ever. It was as if a new heart had been placed in me. I gathered my family, my wife, my 2 young children. They were happy that I was alive, but they didn't know they were about to hear something that would change everything. I took a deep breath. My fingers were shaking. I felt like I was about to walk across a rickety bridge over a chasm. "I need to tell you something," I began in a low voice. They looked at me carefully, perhaps waiting for something about my recovery. While I was between life and death, I saw things. I experienced something that completely transformed everything I believed. And I met Jesus. My wife frowned. My children looked at each other, confused. I continued. I saw Prophet Muhammad. I saw scholars who guided me, but they were all in pain. They told me they were wrong. And Muhammad, he himself told me that the truth is in Jesus, that only through him can we come to God. Silence fell over the room like an avalanche. My wife's eyes filled with tears. She pressed her hands to her chest. "Khalid," her voice was a shaky whisper, "have you lost your mind? This is heresy. This cannot be true. Islam is the only way. You taught us this. You lived this." She was shocked, scared, and hurt. Her eyes searched me as if she were trying to find the man she knew, as if I had disappeared before her eyes. My children moved closer to her, as if instinctively seeking protection. I looked at her tenderly, with tears in my eyes. "I understand how this sounds. I understand how you feel. But please hear me out. I'm not rejecting everything we've been through. I'm just saying that I now know the complete truth. I'm not against you. I'm trying to save you." She pulled back a little, her hand going to her mouth as if she were trying to hold back a scream. This can't be happening. In that moment, I felt the pain of the price that truth exacts. It wasn't easy. It wasn't romantic. It was hard. It cost relationships, reputations, security. But even with all of that, I felt peace. Because more than anything, I knew I was where God wanted me to be. And there, even with my wife's frightened gaze and my children's stunned silence, I decided I would not go back. I had learned the truth. And as hard as it was, I had to share it. With love, with humility, with courage. The cross was before me, and I was ready to carry it. I held my wife's hands gently, trying to silently convey the weight and sincerity of what I was about to say. Our eyes met, hers filled with fear and confusion, mine carrying the fire of new faith and the pain of knowing how much this hurt her. "It's not what I want to believe," I whispered. "That's what I saw. Jesus, he is the truth, the only way to God." The silence that followed was more deafening than any scream. For days, our house was plunged into a silent tension, thick as a winter fog. With each silent prayer my wife made, I felt her heart break a little more. Sometimes I would find her in tears during the wrong, their inaudible pleas echoing between the walls of our home like cries of despair. My children, still too young to understand the depth of what was happening, began to ask innocent questions that cut my soul like blades. "Abba, why are you different? Abba, why don't you pray like before? Do you no longer love Allah?" And I didn't know how to explain. How could I convey to their little hearts what had happened to me? How could I explain that it wasn't a rejection, but a fulfillment of faith? That I wasn't denying God, but finally finding him completely? But I knew this day would come. The day when the truth would have to go beyond the walls of my home. The day when my voice would need to echo beyond the rooms of my house and reach those who once knew me as a guide, as a teacher, as a brother. The time had come to present myself to the community. The same community that had welcomed and revered me for years. The mosque where I had led Friday prayers, where prayers were said for the sick, the dead, and the living, where I had baptized babies, counseled couples, and taught young people to memorize the Quran. This was where I now needed to return, not as a leader, but as a witness to a truth that had transformed my eternity. I organized a small gathering of no more than a dozen men, close friends, brothers in faith with whom I had walked for years. There was a nervousness in the air. They knew something big was about to be said. I began slowly. My hands shook slightly, but my voice remained steady. I told them about the accident, the coma, the hospital, and then, with my heart on fire, I revealed what I had seen in that place between life and death. I spoke of the vision, of the tunnel, of the tormented figures, of the majestic and sad presence of the Prophet Muhammad, and finally, of the message. Jesus is the way, the truth, the life. Only through him can we reach the Father. The silence that followed was profound. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I could see the disbelief written all over their faces. Men who had respected me deeply were now looking at me as if they were a stranger. Murmurs began. Whispers cut through the room like sharp barbs, until a voice rose with barely contained anger. "You've gone mad, Khaled. How can you say something like that after everything you've studied, everything you've taught? You're spitting on your own past, betraying your faith." I looked that man in the eye. This was someone I had taught the Quran to, someone I had prayed for when his mother fell ill. "I'm not cheating on anything," I replied calmly, although my chest felt tight. Quite the contrary. Islam taught me to seek the truth. And it was this sincere search that led me to Jesus. Muhammad himself told me that he is the only way to salvation. And then, chaos. The room erupted in discussion. Some shouted in outrage. Others just shook their heads as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing. Some wept. Some called me crazy, a heretic, an apostate. One or two voices fell silent, but their eyes told me something different. Doubt. Maybe, just maybe, a spark of curiosity. I stood there, standing, in the middle of the storm. My heart was racing, my mouth was dry, but my soul was at peace. Because I knew that at that moment I was fulfilling the calling I had received in that place of shadows and light, where eternity had touched me. "I love you," he said before leaving, "and that is why I cannot keep quiet. Time is short. Jesus told me to speak, and I will obey no matter what the cost." That day I lost many friends, perhaps forever. The respect that once surrounded me turned to distrust. Doors that had once opened with reverence were now closed, but in return I gained something that no position could give me, the certainty that I had found the truth. From that moment on, my path was set. The mission was clear: share the name of Jesus, and never be silent again. From the moment I recognized Jesus as my Savior, my heart could no longer rest in silence. Something within me had changed so profoundly that to remain silent would have been to stifle my own soul. I had become, almost without realizing it, an evangelist within my own community, the same one that had for years looked to me as one of its spiritual leaders. I spent entire nights on my knees, often weeping, crying out to God for courage and wisdom. The scriptures, once distant to me, now became my daily food. Verse after verse, revelation after revelation, Jesus became more and more alive within me. He was not just the center of the Christian faith, he was life itself. I read about his miracles, his unconditional love, his cross, and felt as if I were walking alongside him on every page. I began memorizing verses just as I had with the Quran years before, but now with a heart that burned not out of obligation, but out of passion. During the day, my focus was simple and non-negotiable: to tell anyone who would listen about Jesus, sometimes at the grocery store, other times in quiet conversations with acquaintances, or even with strangers who crossed my path. I felt like someone who had been rescued from a shipwreck and was now running along the beach trying to warn others of the approaching storm. My message was direct, no holds barred: Jesus is the truth. Salvation is in him alone, but the path ahead was far from easy. I soon realized that declaring this new faith publicly was like stepping into a minefield. Losing friends was one of the first pains. People who had once hugged me affectionately now crossed the street rather than greet me. Fellow prayers, with whom I had shared meals during Ramadan, began to avoid even my gaze. I was accused of being deceived, sold out, of being spiritually lost. I was told that I was a disgrace to my family, a living betrayal of Islam. With each cutting word, each rejection, my heart broke. But at the same time, I felt a strange and powerful force sustaining me from within. Jesus had saved me, not just physically in that hospital bed, but spiritually, eternally. And now he was calling me to be a light among the shadows. Each soul that stopped to listen to me, even for a few minutes, rekindled my spirit. Even in the face of rejection, my spirit grew stronger, because I knew I was part of something greater than myself, God's redemptive plan. Weeks passed, and weeks turned into months, and even with all the opposition, my faith grew. I began to study theology, to participate in small Christian groups in secret, and to find brothers who welcomed me as one of their own, even without fully understanding where I came from. I learned to pray in a new way, without formulas, with my heart naked before God. And this transformed me, day after day. But this transformation did not go unnoticed. The persecution came, first as quiet whispers in the hallways of the mosque, then as icy, averted glances, even during funerals or community visits. One day, as I was dropping my son off at school, I noticed 3 men watching me from across the street. One of them spat on the ground when he saw me. Another shook his head in contempt. "He got lost," they said. "He's no longer one of us. He's a traitor." I tried, in the early days, to reach out patiently. I arranged coffees, meetings. I shared my experience sincerely. I told about the vision, about Muhammad, about what I saw on the other side. I didn't shout, I didn't attack. I just asked, please look at the scriptures. Open your hearts. Jesus did not come to destroy. He came to fulfill. He is the bridge between man and God. But the more I spoke, the more hardened they seemed. What to me was liberation sounded to them like blasphemy. Their reactions weren't just denial, they were deep anger. as if my transformation threatened the very fabric they had built their lives on. And maybe he really did threaten to. Still, I didn't stop. I couldn't, because I remembered the faces of those I had seen in that place of torment. Men who believed, just as I had, that rituals alone would be enough. Men who blindly followed traditions, without ever truly knowing the Son of God. I didn't want to see anyone else in that fate. So every morning I woke up was a new beginning, a new opportunity to speak, a new heart to reach. Sometimes a 5-minute conversation was all it took to plant a seed. And other times, I simply offered a smile or a Bible to anyone who would accept it. Yes, I was no longer just an Imam. Now I was a living witness, a messenger of grace, a beacon of light in the night. And even though this made me a target of judgment, of rejection, even of threats, I knew that my purpose was greater than my fear, because Jesus gave me life. And now all I wanted was to bring that life to others. They argued vehemently, their voices firm and filled with a mixture of pain and anger. You have been deceived, Ked. You have allowed doubt to creep into your faith. The Christian scriptures are misleading, false interpretations that only lead us away from the true faith. A stern-faced mosque elder looked me straight in the eye and said with almost palpable severity, "You have forgotten what Islam really teaches. Muhammad is the last prophet, the seal of the prophets, the one who came to guide us to God. There is no other way." I could see the fear, real and deep fear, reflected in their eyes. It wasn't just the fear of losing me, a man who had once been a respected leader. It was the fear of losing their grip on what they believed to be absolute truth. I was shaking the foundations of everything they knew, everything their spiritual and cultural identity rested on. The message I was bringing was a storm that threatened to destroy not just their beliefs, but their entire lives, built on traditions they thought were immutable. But it wasn't just within the walls of the mosque that this hostility grew. Little by little, I realized that my mission was putting me on a collision course with the community at large. I spoke in the streets, in the markets, in the homes, in the square, trying to reach hearts thirsting for hope. But I was often met with closed doors and suspicious eyes. "Why are you telling us this? What do you want with our faith?" many asked, their curiosity mixed with skepticism. A few listened to me attentively, their minds and hearts open, but the vast majority quickly silenced me, as if my message were a heresy to be silenced. "Stay away from our faith, Ked. You have lost your way. Do not bring your new beliefs here," was the silent and sometimes explicit warning. My name, once spoken with respect, was now spoken with contempt. The tension grew, an invisible weight that seemed to follow me wherever I went. One cold, silent night, as I walked home from sharing the gospel with a small group of curious neighbors, simple people searching for answers amid the void of doubt, I was suddenly approached by 2 men. Their faces were unfamiliar to me, shadows in the dim light of the street, but their eyes were piercing, full of suspicion and distrust. "Who are you?" one of them asked, his voice hard, almost a veiled threat. My heart raced, not from fear, but from the awareness of the danger that was now part of my new reality. I felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just an ordinary conversation. This was a confrontation that could define my future, my safety, my life. They continued, their tones both curious and accusatory. "Why are you spreading these ideas? What do you want to gain from this? Do you know what you're doing, Ked? You're getting involved in something much bigger than you realize." I took a deep breath, looking into the eyes of these men. For the first time, I realized that my journey had gone beyond the boundaries of personal faith. I was now at the epicenter of a spiritual and cultural battle. There was no turning back. In a firm voice, I replied, "I'm not here to destroy or cause discord. I bring a message of hope, love, and salvation. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And that is the truth that has transformed my life. I seek no conflict, only the chance to share what I have received." They exchanged suspicious glances, and then one of them issued a cold warning. "Be careful, Ked. Not everyone is as patient as we are. Some people won't let you talk so easily." That night, as I continued my journey home, I felt the weight of responsibility and the danger that surrounded me, but I also felt a burning fire in my chest, the certainty that, despite everything, I could not silence that inner voice that cried out for justice, for truth. My faith in Jesus was not just a comfort, it was a mission I was destined to fulfill, even if it meant facing the darkness. I did not know what tomorrow would bring, but I was determined. I would not turn back. Because now I was walking not only for my own salvation, but for the hope of many who had not yet known the true light. He demanded, blocking my path with a hard, unforgiving gaze. "Who are you?" he asked in a threatening voice. "I am Ked," I replied firmly, feeling the weight of an identity that was no longer just mine, but a divine calling. I am a servant of God, sharing his truth. They exchanged looks filled with hostility, as if I were a sworn enemy. One of them shouted with hatred, "You are preaching falsehoods. You have betrayed your people, your faith." I tried to remain calm, my words coming out softly but full of conviction. "I am not betraying anyone. I am simply speaking what I have seen and heard, what has been revealed to me. There is no other way to salvation except through Jesus." Their anger exploded like a storm. Before I could even react, one of them grabbed my arm with a rough grip and pushed me against a cold, rough wall nearby. You dare speak of Jesus in our land, in the name of Islam? You must be silenced. Fear gripped my heart, a cold that seemed to want to paralyze me, but I stood firm. You can try to silence me, but the truth will not be silenced. I spoke with all the courage my spirit could muster. For a moment I thought I was going to be attacked, but to my surprise, they backed away, and one of them let out a mocking laugh. "We shall see if your so-called truth will protect you in the end," he said, as they walked away into the shadows. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop hearing their words echoing in my mind. The fear was real, pulsing through me like nothing I had ever felt before. My faith had always been unshakable, but it had been confined to the comfortable confines of my community where I was respected and acknowledged. Now I was seen as a traitor, someone who had strayed dangerously from the only true path they knew. Even in the face of such fierce opposition, something deep and inexplicable inside me told me that I was on the right path. I remembered the deep, inexplicable peace I had felt when I first embraced Jesus, that certainty that filled my heart, the conviction that this was the truth I needed to follow no matter what the cost. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that nothing, not threats, not hostility, not rejection from the people I loved, could change this unshakable truth. The months that followed were marked by similar encounters, moments of tension, of challenge, of pain. I had to stand firm, often alone, facing the judgment and scorn of those who had once respected me. My faith was tested at every turn, my courage tested in countless silent battles. There were moments of discouragement, nights when I wondered if I was doing the right thing, if I had been too hasty in sharing such a radical truth. I wondered if my actions were putting myself and my family in real danger, if the price I would pay was too high. But through all those dark moments, I never lost the certainty of what Jesus had done for me and what he continues to do. Because it is wonderful to meet Jesus Christ. He transforms lives, gives hope where there is despair, light where there is darkness. He didn't just change my faith, he changed my heart, my soul, my destiny. To encounter Jesus is to discover the purest love, the peace that surpasses all understanding, the strength that sustains us even in the cruelest storms. And to be transformed by him is the most profound and liberating experience anyone can have, because in Jesus we find true life, true salvation, the true path to God.